Hello everybody, let's study The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. Samuel Johnson said, Shakespeare is above all writers, at least above all modern writers, the poet of nature, the poet that holds up to his readers a faithful mirror of manners and of life. The Merchant of Venice is a romantic comedy and is one of Shakespeare's most brilliant, most entertaining, and most delightful plays. The play contains 5 stories which have been interwoven so skillfully. They are the Bond story, the Casket story, the Lorenzo Jessica story, the Trial story, and the Ring story. The very important aspect of this play is the antagonism which existed in those days between the Jews and the Christians. We shall study the play in 5 parts. This video contains the first part of the play, that is, the Bond story. So, let's begin. The Bond story takes place in Venice, a trading city with a thriving community. The scenes in Venice take place on the streets. The Venetian society is energetic, opulent, and full of wealthy, confident young men. Antonio is a wealthy merchant of Venice, owning a large number of merchant ships. He is a prominent figure in the city and one of the leading citizens of Venice. When the play opens, we find him in a melancholic mood. His friends try to cheer him up. Soon his bosom friend, Bassanio, joins him, and we get to know that Bassanio was in need of 3,000 ducats. Bassanio is a young man of extravagant habits. He already owes some money to his friend Antonio and now approaches for another loan of 3,000 ducats to pay a visit to Belmont in order to win a rich and beautiful lady, Portia, as his wife. He acknowledges the fact that he is already under a debt to Antonio, but also expresses his sincere desire to repay the first loan while asking for a second. Portia is a rich heiress of Belmont. In describing Portia to Antonio, Bassanio says that she is fair and fairer than the world. He compares her to Cato's daughter, Brutus's Portia. He compares her sunny locks of hair to the golden fleece, and her suitors to the many Jasons who went to Colchos to win the golden fleece. Antonio has no cash in hand at the moment, although he is a man of substance and high prestige, as his ships are sailing upon the seas and all his money is invested in the cargoes which they carry. But Antonio genuinely wants to help his friend, so he asks Bassanio to borrow the required amount of money from somebody else in Antonio's name. At this point, Bassanio has no other choice but to approach Shylock the Jew, who can lend him the required sum. Shylock the Jew is the only moneylender in Venice who can lend him such a big sum of 3,000 ducats with Antonio as the surety. Shylock the Jew is a moneylender by profession who tries to enrich himself by exploiting the financial needs of others. He hates Antonio as he lends money to needy persons without charging any interest and thus bringing down the rate of interest in Venice. His another reason for hating Antonio is that he is a Christian. Antonio too hates Shylock as he is a usurer, but even more as Shylock is a Jew. In fact, Antonio goes out of his way to insult and degrade Shylock. On many occasions, he has abused Shylock, calling him a dog and even spat on his clothes. Shylock has been patiently bearing all this, waiting for the right time to feed fat the ancient grudge. When Bassanio approaches him, Shylock perceives an opportunity to take his revenge upon Antonio and agrees to give the required loan if Antonio signs a bond. The condition of the bond is that if Antonio fails to repay the amount within a period of 3 months, Shylock would have the right to cut off a pound of flesh from any part of Antonio's body he likes. Shylock's motive in imposing this tough condition is that if Antonio fails to repay the money for some reason or the other, he would get an opportunity to kill Antonio. The conditions of the bond. If Antonio is unable to pay 3,000 ducats in 3 months' time, then Shylock would cut a pound of flesh from any part of Antonio's body. Antonio proves himself to be a true friend of Bassanio by signing the bond regardless of the danger which it implies. He is willing to risk his life to meet the need of his friend. The major trait of Antonio's character is his capability of friendship and his profound affection for Bassanio. The period of 3 months prescribed in the bond for the repayment of the loan soon comes to its end. News comes that Antonio's all ships have been wrecked on the seas. Antonio is reduced to a state of bankruptcy. 3 months have now expired, and the Jew files a suit against Antonio demanding the penalty specified in the bond. The bond story is the most important source of interest and most important from the dramatic and technical points of view. It forms the backbone of the play. The bond story later gets interlinked with the casket story and finally leading to the trial story. Antonio. In sooth, I know not why I am sad. It wearies me, you say it wearies you. But how I caught it, found it, or came by it, what stuff it is made of, whereof it is born, I am to learn. These are the opening lines of the play where Antonio talks about his sadness. He says that he really does not know why he is feeling sad. He has no idea at all how he caught this sadness, how he found it, or how it originated. Antonio. I hold the world but as the world Gratiano, a stage where every man must play a part, and mine is a sad one. Antonio is replying Gratiano, who feels that Antonio thinks too much of the world. In reply, Antonio says that he pays no more attention to this world than it deserves. He regards this world as the stage of a theatre where every man has to play a certain role. His role on the stage is that of a sad man. Bassanio. It is not unknown to you, Antonio, how much I have disabled mine estate by something showing a more swelling port than my faint means would grant continuance. Here Bassanio says that Antonio knows well that he had diminished his wealth by maintaining a much higher standard of living and by putting up a greater show than his limited means permitted him to maintain and to continue with it. Shylock. How like a fawning publican he looks. I hate him for he is a Christian, but more for that in low simplicity he lends out money gratis. Shylock is speaking to himself, calling Antonio a fawning publican, which means an innkeeper. He says that he hates Antonio for he is a Christian and more for he lends money to needy people without charging any interest from them, thus bringing down the rate of interest in Venice. That brings us to the end of this video. Stay tuned for part 2 and don't forget to press the bell icon for notifications.